Awards Season by Lorne Dixon. Copyright 2021. Before the explosions, the burning buildings, and the screaming, it all began with applause. I sat next to Ollie Wright and watched as everyone in the auditorium jumped to their feet. Hands began to clap, a few women screamed in delight, and Ollie's mouth cracked open just a bit. I could see confusion, betrayal, and childish self-pity growing in his eyes as he joined the standing ovation. He knew a camera would be studying his reaction, and he quickly recovered, put on a cherub smile, and nodded slightly as he clapped. He almost looked happy. I thought it was a better performance than he had given in years. Then again, hard to say the last few roles were in pictures that had apparently been edited on video game consoles by adolescent boys with attention deficit disorder. I actually liked those flicks better than the serious work he did. The movies with motorcycle stunts and hand gliding and machine guns actually gave a publicist something to do. No one wants to read about how a star managed to nail a 17th century rural Russian accent. No one cares. Martial arts training, they care. Once the applause died, Ollie leaned over as he sunk into his seat and said, "Call over to the center. Ask for them to have Kai Ten Fowler meet me in an hour. You are invited to Harry Allerman's after party." "We're not going," I asked, carefully stressing the right syllables to let him know I thought it was an atrocious idea. He fluttered his hand. "It'll only take a minute." I would have fought him, but there was too much hurt in his face, too much slipping pride, so I just nodded and turned my attention to the stage. A rock and roll singer and a washed-up comedian handed Morris Tanner the award for superior performance in a male lead role in a feature film, drama, or comedy. Morris wore a big, stoned smile and rumbled through his acceptance speech, not breathing between words but gasping between run-on sentences. He thanked his mother, his lovers, and Jesus as he held out the statue of a little golden man with impossibly perfect posture. I glanced down the aisle and caught sight of Ollie's ex-wife, Terry Vance, sitting next to a producer with hair plugs and hearing aids. Bleached blonde, too thin, and wearing one layer of makeup too many, it was hard to imagine her as she was a year-ago brunette, healthy and A-list. An internet video scandal had dropped her down to the direct-to-video crowd, but she still dated well enough to worm her way into an awards show. She looked positively miserable. I considered pointing her out to Ollie. Seeing her on the verge of both tears and another meltdown might have cheered him up. But I always sort of liked Terry, so I didn't. Or maybe it had more to do with my feelings for Ollie. Watching him squirm had its entertainment value. The show ended after an off-key medley of theme music and low-rent performance artists and the awarding of the Superior Achievement in Film Drama or Comedy Award to a film I had slept through. Ollie bolted out, ignoring a few offered hands, and hurried us into his limousine. I told the geriatric driver to head to the center. He rolled his tired eyes and stomped on the gas. When we reached the center, Ollie turned to me and mumbled, "Morris freakin' Anner? That's some kind of joke? That fuck couldn't act his way out of a Star Trek convention." Ollie threw open the door and stormed out. He was already through by the time I struggled out of the car. I had put on some weight in the last few years. Success in this town will do that. My bank account wasn't the only thing that had gotten fat. I followed him inside and caught up with him kneeling before the tellurium statue of Gibuks Franowski. Paler than ivory, it always gave me the creeps. Pupils missing from its eyes like a Roman statue, a body of crustaceous-like plated armor, a jagged, subtle grin. And then there were the tentacles. Praise, love, devotion, war, Ollie muttered quickly and got to his feet. I pretended to do the same and followed him to the counseling hall. I've kept myself as ignorant of calcology as possible. Ollie doesn't talk about it, and I doubt I'd listen. I respect the customs, bow at the occasional altar, and nod knowingly when appropriate. But I wouldn't know a K-Tet spirit from an outer-body dimensional rift. Spiritually, I'm a simple man. Give me a Jewish hippie nailed to some timber, and I'm good to go. Still, I always smiled as I admired the framed art on the center's walls, mostly reproduced diagrams from old consumer electronics manuals. Kai Ten Fowler was waiting in the counseling hall wearing a flowing powder blue robe, reading glasses, and a Mets cap. I'd call the expression on his face serene, but I'd be lying. He looked stoned. "Kai ate right. How can I be?" "You watch it tonight?" he asked with impatience. Fowler tried to crinkle his brow, but the botulinum injections had rendered most of his face immobile, so instead he stuck out his bottom lip. "The awards show." Yeah, Ollie struck both fists against his shins. Yeah, Fowler nodded. Ollie turned, put a hand against my chest, and pushed me back into the hall. As he closed the door between us, I heard him ask Fowler, "Where do we keep the forbidden rites?" From there on, I just stood and stared at the door. Little snippets of their conversation would sometimes slip out under the doorway. Ollie's voice grew more and more animated. Fowler seemed to get more and more depressed. Just an award. Doesn't deserve. Say the spell. Time to show every. Warned you. The door flew open and Ollie bounced out, a box under his arm and his hair frizzed out in all directions. He grabbed me by the shirt and pulled me down the hall. We're going. Where? He grinned as we left the center. To Harry Allerman's. We're expected. We jumped into the limo and set off for the party. Ollie opened the box and fumbled through assembling an old camcorder. 20 years old, the camera was a monster. He lifted it over one shoulder, snapped the battery into place, and turned it on. I could hear it hum and click. I tried to comb Ollie's hair, but he swatted me away. The limo door opened at Harry Allerman's after party and Ollie sprinted out. I wiggled my ass out of the car and tried to keep up. A kind of maniacal energy swirled around him as he moved, muttering his hellos and waving to paparazzi cameras, all the time cradling the old video camera like a newborn. Inside the doors, the old guard hugged the walls and stared into their drinks, remembering the old days, searching through their cloudy memories for the parties where they had been in the center of the room surrounded by sycophants, would-be starlets, and offshore financing sharks circling their prey. Ollie headed straight into the room's core and tunneled through the ranks of coped-up agents and balding producers. I followed like a child reaching for his mother's coattails. Ollie's radar had already locked onto his target. Morris Tanner stood at a long buffet table, his male lead role award clutched in one hand, a sugar-lipped martini in the other. I considered for one horrible moment that Ollie might rush the younger actor and take a swing at his broad chin. To my relief, Ollie took only a few more steps and then stopped. He slid the video camera over his shoulder and aimed it at Tanner. My relief evaporated as a random, horrible thought shot through my head. Could there be a gun hidden inside the camera? Would I be standing next to the man as he pulled the trigger? Ollie whispered, Hethu Wignil ot Vixti Mullera, or something. Then he pressed the record button on the camcorder. No one noticed another camera in the room, even an antique monster sitting on the shoulder of one of the most recognizable faces in the world. Tanner was staring into the wonderbread cleavage of a reality show actress as he told a story about an incompetent assistant director and an incident involving food service. He froze for a second, and the smile slid off his face. He held the award up. This thing's vibrating. Is it supposed to vibrate? Tanner's publicist stole the Jack Rose cocktail from his hand. I heard Ollie chuckle. People don't normally chuckle, they laugh and the giggle, but only lonely, overweight white kids chuckle. If I still had any doubts about Ollie's sanity, the chuckle killed them. The Wonderbra and the publicist stepped away. A second later, I could see why. Tanner's hand began to convulse as if hit by an electrical current. He tried to hold on, but the award in his hand was shaking. Not just shaking. It seemed to be expanding, growing. He dropped the award. In the flutter of motion, I thought I saw one golden arm reaching up to snare Tanner's hand. Ollie kept filming as the crowd backed away from Tanner and the award, leaving an open ring and bringing Ollie and his camera into the open. They were chattering and scared. But they kept watching. The award righted itself and sat up. It was the size of a small dog by the time it put both metallic hands flat to the floor and pushed off. It grew more as it stood up. Tanner tried to find his publicist, but the man had already fled into the sea of high-fashion leisure suits and tiny black dresses. Even without spotting him, Tanner asked, "This some kind of special EFF?" The award, only inches from him, stood 3 inches taller than Tanner. The actor stared into the award's face. He saw the distorted reflection of his own face over the blank expression it wore. It must have cut straight through the alcohol and cocaine, because he stumbled back and crashed into the long buffet table, spilling a plate of vegan pig de foie gras. The crowd fell silent. They stood perfectly still, frozen in place, as they watched the award reach out with one long, slim arm and brush a lock of hair out of Tanner's face. Tanner blew out a cackle of nervous laughter. A cell phone rang. Tanner's instincts took over. He reached into his trouser pocket, fished his phone out, and answered it. Yeah? No, really, you don't have to... Who signed on? Well, I could read it, I suppose, but, I have something here that I'm going to have to call you back. The award reached out and swiped the phone out of Tanner's hand. Tanner's jaws clicked apart, and his mouth dropped open as he watched the award put the phone to the molded contour of its head. It had no ears. After a moment, it dropped both the call and the phone. It shattered against the hardwood floor. Shit, Tanner yelled. That's a new phone, a prototype model. And I just signed a new contract. You know what it'll cost to replace that. The award glanced down at the floor. The distance to the floor was increasing. It was still growing. You tell whoever you work for production company, effects house, network, whatever that this little stunt guarantees I'll never work with them. Tanner took a step towards the award, put a hand to its chest, and pushed. It didn't move. Not at all. Now get the fuck out to here. The award reached down, pried Tanner's hand off its chest, and twisted. Tanner fell to his knees and screamed. Okay, just let me go now. It hurts, Jesus God, it hurts. Instead of letting him go, the award ratcheted his arm back and pulled, tearing the arm off at the shoulder. The place erupted into screams shrill enough to permanently deafen a Pekingese. The award curled the fingers of Tanner's hand into a fist and then beat the actor with it. You would think that there would have been a mass exodus at that point, and a few seconds later there was, but they kept watching for a moment longer. Stretched out on the floor, his own fist pounding his head back and forth, Tanner began to hyperventilate and scream. The second before he stopped moving entirely, he whispered, "It was a lie, Gertrude." Then he died. The crowd applauded. They'd never seen a more convincing death scene. Then the award turned, golden face speckled with blood, Tanner's arm hanging down from its huge fist, and they bolted for the doors in a tidal surge. Ollie began laughing. I slammed my hand down on his shoulder and tried to spin him around so we, too, could rush for the doors, but he resisted and remained locked in place, facing the 9-foot metal man, one eye behind the camera lens. "Fuck off," he told me. "I have to keep the camera on it. That's how it works." I froze in my loafers as the award walked by us in wide strides and briefly turned its head to acknowledge Ollie. Without slowing a single footstep, it headed towards the lobby where the crowd had bottlenecked by the doors. Ollie followed it with the camera, and when it threatened to disappear from view, with his feet. And God help me, I followed him. What the hell else was I going to do? The award tore a path through the partygoers. It impaled an executive who only greenlit movies based on 70s television shows into a metal coat rack. It tore the saline implants out of an unfortunate debutante's chest. Others it simply tossed out of its way. The rest hugged the walls and let it pass. Ollie and I ran after it, trampling over unconscious bodies, not exactly uncommon in this town under different circumstances. We tumbled out onto North Fairfax. The award stood on the red carpet. The paparazzi were waiting behind velvet ropes. They looked like a school of confused sturgeon swimming upstream, only to find a dry reed bed where they were used to an opening estuary. They didn't know who or what the hell the award was, but it only took a moment for them to begin shooting it. Flashbulbs exploded like the Iraqi skies in the first days of the war. Shock and awe, baby, shock and awe. The award shook violently, and with each photograph it grew, which of course meant the paparazzi took more photos to document the effect. Ollie was cackling, head thrown back, camcorder still pointed at the award. 15 feet tall, 20-25, 30. As it grew, the award turned its attention to the street. North Fairfax was lined with storefronts that could have been on Main Street in any town, USA, and had been used in countless films as just that. Its eyes seemed to follow the long line of lit signs that cascaded from the rooftops like fire escapes. The award stood 35 feet high, then 40. The flashbulbs kept up their machine gun fire. Its head shot up over the second-story roofs. It took a step and the paparazzi scattered out of its way, still shooting, a colony of ants scurrying. The award reached out and snatched an arrow-shaped bakery store sign off the building next door to the banquet hall. It tore away from its moorings without any noticeable resistance. The mass of photographers sprung forward, towards the award, all angling for the perfect shot. I saw a few of them turn to run when they realized what the award meant to do with the bakery sign. The award released the sign like a paper airplane. A wave of blood splashed at us when the sign flattened the paparazzi. I was reminded of 100 taxicab tires running through the same number of rainwater puddles. I wiped my glasses. Ollie wiped his camera lens. The award moved north. It stepped on the tail of a limousine parked outside a liquor store and sent it flipping into the air like a tiddlywink. Upside down, it punched a hole into the second floor of an old charities building and hung there for a moment, hanging out, before sliding inside. We heard several loud crashes before the first floor display windows burst and the remains of the car slid back out onto the sidewalk. Ollie ran after the award, laughing and videotaping. I called out for him. He stopped, half-turned, and waved for me to follow. I could have walked away. I really could have. If you're an East Coast guy with a regular 9 to 5, A potholder-handed wife, two public school kids, a mixed breed dog, and a mortgage you probably wouldn't understand. But I had to follow Ollie Wright was a list, damn it. A fuel oil truck turned off of Melrose. The driver swerved in the lane when he saw the award lumbering towards him, and the truck flipped. Scraping and squealing, the overturned vehicle bounced over the sidewalk, crashed against the face of a Greasy Spoon restaurant, and exploded. Blistering wind ruffled our clothes as we ran after the award. We watched a brilliant orange fireball funnel up from the wreckage. The restaurant roof burst into flames. The award grappled a palm tree out of its sidewalk planter and held its evergreen leaves out to the flame. Once the fire spread to the treetop, the award continued up North Fairfax, swinging it like a torch in a cavern, pausing to use its flaming tip to set other rooftops and palms on fire. Hollywood burned. People poured onto the street from out of the little apartments over the storefronts. As soon as they saw the award, they took off running. The award followed just behind the running crowd, stomping on the stragglers. It reminded me of the running of the bulls, except with people in their pajamas, and a 45-foot tall male lead role in a feature film drama or comedy award. The screaming became a noise like static. Geebucks Franoski, Almighty Ollie yelled. We couldn't keep up. Ollie handed me the camcorder and told me to keep it pointed towards the Titan. He sprinted across the street and jumped into a convertible that looked like Kennedy might have died inside it. I don't know if he had another calculogy spell ready or if he just hot-wired the car, but in a moment he pulled up and told me to jump in. He was already driving before I could close the passenger side door. I stared up at the fires, Jesus. He groaned, took the camera from me, and dropped it on the dash. I hope it all burns to the ground, every damn inch of it. Return this hellhole to the desert. The award turned at the corner and headed east down West Sunset Boulevard. Ollie flattened the gas pedal to the slip mat and sped to the intersection. Sports cars screeched and skidded as they fled the award's path. A double-decker tour bus loaded with tourists overturned in the crosswalk. Ollie turned the wheel hard, narrowly missing the vacationers crawling out of the wreck. Some ran, but more flipped open their cell phones and began snapping photos of the award as it stormed down West Sunset. It grew. Straightening up the convertible, Ollie tilted the camcorder to keep the award in frame. We both tensed as a row of storefronts collapsed behind us in a thunderous crescendo. Something exploded. Voices wailed. The buildings and the palm trees were taller on Sunset, but it was difficult to tell the award had grown to nearly 50 feet and now dwarfed even the tallest treetops. It tossed the fiery palm in its hand into the crowd. 6 men danced in the street, gold medallions swinging, covered in flames. It was better choreographed than most music videos, but shorter, and it ended in charred bodies smoldering on the street. I heard sirens wailing in the distance, but it was impossible to tell where they came from. The night was too full of noise, constant screaming, the roar of fire, cars crashing, glass breaking, and the award's echoing footsteps. The award tore an ornamental clock tower off the corner of an entertainment superstore and launched it into a bistro's dining promenade. The entire side of the restaurant collapsed, sending a landslide of timber and metal into the street. A fork bounced off the convertible's windshield as we passed. The award turned and headed up North Highland Avenue. Ollie swore and sped up, aware the award had almost slipped out of the camcorder's view. The convertible hit a torrent of water erupting out of a ruptured hydrant, and we hydroplaned into the cross-section. North Highland came into view like a widescreen pan of a vast landscape. The street had been partitioned off for filming. The cast and crew of a rap video stood in the center of the street, watching the award approach. The lighting guys and cameraman fled. The rapper, his posse, and a line of scantily clad bimbos stood their ground. The award lifted a camouflage Hummer off the street and hurled it at the fleeing crew. If it were bowling, it would have been a strike. The rapper pulled a Glock from his waistband and pointed it towards the award. Before he fired, he shouted to one of the gangstas. I thought that East Coast, West Coast shit was done. Yo! The shots ricocheted off the award and took out the dancing girls. The posse screamed and headed in every direction, some fumbling for their cell phones, most holding up their baggy pants so they could run. The rapper tossed the Glock away and extended a middle finger. The award slammed one huge hand down, swatting him like an insect on the asphalt. When it pulled back, both its handprint and the rapper were embedded deep into the street. It made a certain sense it seemed like everyone else had their handprints on the streets of this town. We drove through the sawhorses, over a bundle of electrical cords and shattered video equipment, and followed the award as it turned right onto Hollywood Boulevard. The street was jammed with traffic and hundreds of tourists and journalists jaywalking between the cars. The street always reminded me of the parade route in Disneyland. Bright buildings, lots of activity, music playing from rooftops. The award killed all that business quick. It charged down the street, crushing sedans and taxis with each step, growing a little from each tourist camera flash. The screaming started up again, even louder, efficiently excavating a new tunnel through my brain. I put both hands to my ears, but that didn't dampen the volume, it only warped the sound. Reaching down, the award wrapped its hands around a delivery truck and hurled it over its shoulder. I craned my neck as it soared over our heads, and then turned in my seat to follow it as it flew towards North La Brea Avenue. A news helicopter sped over the rooftop of the Man Grauman's Chinese Theater just in time to collide with the truck. Both exploded and rained down on the theater. Ollie swerved the convertible onto the sidewalk and drove over the stars on the Hall of Fame. A figure darted out of a doorway and screamed. Then the convertible drove him to the ground. The car's frame bounced as its front right tire crushed his skull. I thought I recognized him. Guy had a few supporting roles and a recurrent television gig. Christ, Ollie, I yelled. Not Christ, he snickered. Gibux Franowski, liberator of the 7 planets, seeder of the new heaven called Earth. And even watching a 55-foot award statue head over the wall onto Hollywood Freeway, I still thought all that sounded like horseshit. Tires screeched as the award crossed all 8 lanes of the freeway. We followed in its path, narrowly avoiding the Y-shaped light pole that had toppled on the concrete median. The award took off north, cutting through an alley on the other side of the Boulierde. Pushed too hard, the convertible's engine began to roar in warning. A homeless man in the alley watched dumbfounded as the award strode over his head. Ollie hit him at full speed. He tumbled over the grill, cracked the windshield, and disappeared over the roof. The award led us through the winding neighborhoods north of the 101 and up the hills. At one point I thought the convertible would surely die. The engine began to bark out its last will and testament, but then Ollie forced more gas down its gullet, and it steadied. The roads leading into Griffith Park were quiet. As if the rest of the night hadn't been strange enough, we found ourselves following the award into the wilderness, its footsteps no longer claps of thunder. It turned its head and glanced back. For the first time I realized it was aware of us, that it knew we were following. It tore a hole through the security fence and waited for us on the other side. We drove through, and it continued climbing the mountains. The convertible began to shimmer, then shake. Instead of rocking and rolling, it died. Ollie snatched the camcorder off the dash. We ran after the award all the way up to the clearing, to the Hollywood sign. As we approached, Ollie turned to me and handed me the camera. Here, take this. Keep it in shot. What are you doing? I asked. He smiled, not the crazed grimace he had been flashing all night, but the one I used to know. The smile I used to get when I delivered a double mocha espresso with 2 shots of peppermint to the set. I have to be in the footage. Don't you see? This is the role I was born for. I took the camera and he chased the award up the incline. I closed one eye and put the other to the viewfinder. The award had grown more. It stood over 60 feet tall, the result of far too many photo ops, too much publicity. It was 10 feet taller than the sign. It had grown bigger than Hollywood. There was someone standing on the H. I zoomed in and focused on the figure, keeping a sliver of the award in frame. It was Terry Vance, her eyes closed, mascara running, a bottle of something expensive and potent in her hand. She must have been more depressed than I'd known. She wouldn't have been the first to jump. Like those burning Buddhist monks in Vietnam, it was the only way to shuffle out the door and make the right statement. She opened her blue eyes and stared at her own reflection in the award's chest. She didn't seem frightened. She sobbed. Then she jumped. I zoomed out. She fell, her long, thin body bending at the waist, blonde hair waving behind like the flag of a defeated army. I always sort of liked Terry. I swallowed hard. Terry fell directly on Ollie. He collapsed to the ground and screamed. Both of his legs snapped inward and he flattened to the soil. Terry didn't move. Ollie tried to squirm out from underneath, but his broken legs and dislocated arms wouldn't move. He thrashed from side to side like a kid in a rowboat, but he was going nowhere. The award stepped behind the sign. Ollie looked up and yelled no. But by Gibux Franowski, I don't think it was listening. With a gentle shove, it pushed the H off balance. A second before the sign flattened him, Ollie made a pathetic, whiny little sound. It was a horrible performance. The voters had been right. Tanner deserved the prize. The award looked at me through the camera lens. I didn't know what to do. I hadn't considered that the final act would be up to me. I wasn't a performer, I was a guy that made calls and arranged interviews. I had never ridden a motorcycle, flew a hand glider, or fired a machine gun. Hell, I couldn't even speak with a convincing 17th century rural Russian accent, but it was just the award and I and a sign that read Hollywood up on that mountainside. Someone had to do something. So I turned off the goddamn camera.